He ran the Mafia empire with silence and fear. No man dared to challenge him. Until the day she walked in, with smudged lipstick and a gaze that burned like wildfire. It was just a kiss. A single defiant kiss, that nobody should have witnessed. But when the judge's daughter pressed her lips against his, the empire shook. "You know what you're hiding from me, right?" she whispered. He tried to laugh it off. But what she knew could destroy everything he'd built with blood. And what he hated most was exactly what she represented, the choice to not fear. If you've ever loved someone you couldn't have, you know what he felt when that kiss went down. This story's got you hooked. Drop a like and subscribe right now. 'Cause there are loves that don't set you free, they ignite the war. He was the king of shadows, born into nothing, raised by the streets that chewed up weak men and spit out their bones. No silver spoon, no trust fund, no daddy's connections to save his ass when things got rough. Just raw survival instinct and a hunger that never quit gnawing at his insides. By the time he turned 12, he'd already seen more death than most people witness in a lifetime. His mother overdosed in a motel bathroom off Highway 101, needle still hanging from her arm when the manager found her 3 days later. No father in the picture, never was, probably never gave a damn. So he did what any kid with nothing left to lose would do. He disappeared into the underbelly of Los Angeles, where the neon lights don't reach and the sirens never stop wailing. The streets taught him everything the world refused to. How to read a man's intentions in the twitch of his eye. How to move through shadows like smoke. How to take a life before breakfast and sleep like a baby that same night. He started running packages for the West Side Crew when he was 14, small-time stuff at first, just enough to keep him fed and breathing. But the boss back then, old man Castellano, saw something in him that nobody else did. Not kindness, not loyalty, but potential. The kind of potential that's soaked in gasoline and just waiting for someone to strike the match. By 17 he wasn't running packages anymore. He was running entire operations. Territory disputes, smuggling routes, protection rackets that stretched from Santa Monica all the way down to San Diego. Castellano trusted him with everything, treated him like the son he never had, taught him the game from the inside out. And that's exactly why, on a cold February night when the fog rolled in thick off the Pacific, he put 2 bullets in Castellano's skull and took everything the old man had built. No hesitation. No remorse. Just business. Cold, calculated, necessary business. Now at 29, his name echoed through every dark corner of California like a curse you don't speak out loud. Vincent Vince Moretti. The Reaper. El Silencio. Depending on who you asked and how badly they wanted to stay breathing. He controlled everything. The ports, the clubs, the politicians who pretended they weren't on his payroll, the cops who looked the other way when his black SUVs rolled through red lights at 3 in the morning. Every order he gave transformed men into corpses and laws into dust. He operated from a penthouse in downtown LA 40 floors up where the city sprawled beneath him like a kingdom of broken dreams and shattered promises. He believed nothing could touch him. That he was untouchable. Invincible. Beyond the reach of justice, karma, or whatever cosmic force people prayed to when they were desperate. He'd built walls so high around himself that even God would need a ladder to get in. No relationships, no attachments, no weaknesses. Just power. Pure, unfiltered, intoxicating power. And he was totally cool with that. Until her. She was born on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Marble columns, charity galas where champagne flowed like water and everyone wore smiles as fake as their Botox. Alessandra Hayes. 26 years old, Stanford Law graduate, daughter of Judge Richard Hayes, the man who'd sent more criminals to death row than any other judge in California history. She grew up in a Malibu mansion overlooking the ocean, surrounded by servants and security and the suffocating weight of expectations. Everyone expected her to be perfect. The perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect future prosecutor who'd follow in Daddy's righteous footsteps. And she played the part beautifully. Showed up to every fundraiser with that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Gave speeches about justice and equality while wearing dresses that cost more than most people's cars. Collected awards and accolades like they were Pokemon cards, stacking them up on her resume while her soul slowly withered behind the facade. The world saw what it wanted to see, a privileged princess who had everything handed to her on a silver platter. But nobody knew what she kept hidden beneath that polished exterior. Nobody knew about the nights she'd sneak out of the mansion and drive down to Venice Beach, sitting alone on the sand until sunrise, watching the waves crash and wondering if this was really all there was to life. Nobody knew about the panic attacks that hit her in the middle of those fancy dinners, when she'd excuse herself to the bathroom and grip the marble countertop until her knuckles turned white, fighting to breathe through the crushing weight of being someone she wasn't. And absolutely nobody knew about the secret she'd been carrying for 3 years, the one that would absolutely destroy her father's career and everything the Hayes name represented if it ever came to light. See, when she was 23, fresh out of law school and naive as hell, she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. Her father, the great Judge Richard Hayes, the beacon of justice, taking a briefcase full of cash from a defense attorney in exchange for throwing a case. She'd walked into his study looking for a book, and there it was, spread out on his desk like evidence at a crime scene. $200,000 in unmarked bills. She never said a word, never confronted him. Just tucked that knowledge away in the darkest corner of her mind and kept playing the perfect daughter. But it ate at her every single day. Made her question everything she'd ever believed about right and wrong, good and evil, justice and corruption. How could she prosecute criminals when her own father was one? How could she stand in a courtroom and talk about the sanctity of the law when the man who raised her had sold his integrity for the price of a luxury car? That's why she couldn't love anyone connected to the law. Every prosecutor, every attorney, every cop who tried to date her reminded her of the lie she was living. And that's exactly why, on some twisted psychological level, she found herself drawn to the opposite. To danger. To darkness. To men who didn't pretend to be heroes. The universe has a sick sense of humor sometimes. What he loved most was forbidden. What she hated most was exactly what he was. A criminal. A killer. A man built from violence and blood. Everything her father claimed to fight against. Everything she'd been taught to despise. But here's the thing about forbidden fruit, it tastes sweeter precisely because you're not supposed to bite. And when their worlds collided at that fundraiser on a Saturday night in October, when her eyes met his across a crowded ballroom full of politicians and pretenders, something clicked into place that neither of them could explain. Not love. Not yet. But recognition. Like two broken pieces from different puzzles that somehow fit together anyway. He swore never to look at a woman connected to the law. She swore never to get involved with someone who lived by the gun. But life doesn't give a damn about the promises you make to yourself when you're trying to stay safe. Life only cares about pushing you toward the very thing that'll either save you or destroy you completely. And sometimes those two outcomes look exactly the same. The kiss happened on a night when nobody was supposed to be there. The fundraiser had wrapped up hours ago, all the politicians and socialites had stumbled into their town cars and Ubers, heading back to their gated communities where they could pretend they gave a damn about the city's problems. But Alessandra stayed behind. She told her security detail she forgot her phone, waved them off with that smile they never questioned, and took the elevator up to the rooftop terrace of the Fairmont Hotel. She needed air. Space. A minute to breathe without someone watching her every move. What she didn't know was that Vince owned a penthouse suite in that same building. One of his many properties scattered across the city like strategic chess pieces. He'd been up there for a meeting that ran late, the kind of meeting where briefcases get exchanged and questions don't get asked. His guys had just left, and he'd stepped out onto his private section of the terrace to smoke a cigarette and watch the city lights blur into a sea of gold and red below. That's when he saw her. Standing at the edge of the rooftop, 52 floors up, her champagne-colored dress catching the wind, dark hair whipping around her face. For a second, just a split second, he thought she might jump. But then she turned, and their eyes locked for the second time that night. No crowd between them now. No pretense. No escape. "You're not supposed to be up here," he said, keeping his voice level, casual, even though his pulse kicked up a notch. He recognized her immediately. Judge Hayes's daughter. The untouchable princess. The last person on earth he should be talking to. "Neither are you," she shot back, and there was something sharp in her voice, something that told him she wasn't scared. Most people got nervous around him even when they didn't know who he was. Something about the way he carried himself, the coldness in his eyes. But she just stood there, arms crossed, chin up, like she was daring him to make a move. "I live here," he said, flicking ash over the railing. "Lucky you." She walked closer, heels clicking against the concrete, and he could smell her perfume now, something expensive and clean that didn't belong anywhere near him. Must be nice, owning half the city. He smiled at that. Not a friendly smile. More like a wolf showing teeth. "You've been doing your homework." "I know exactly who you are, Vincent Moretti." She stopped about 3 feet away, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the cracks in that perfect facade. "And you know who I am. So let's skip the part where we pretend this is a coincidence." Wasn't planning on it. He took a drag from his cigarette, studying her. "What are you really doing up here, princess? Daddy's fundraiser bore you to death?" Something flashed across her face. Anger maybe. Or pain. hard to tell in the dim light. Don't call me that. What, princess? That's what you are, aren't you? Living in that Malibu mansion, playing dress up for the cameras, pretending you're gonna save the world one law degree at a time. And you're what, exactly? She stepped even closer now, invading his space in a way nobody ever did. A big bad mafia boss who thinks he's untouchable? Who kills people before breakfast and sleeps just fine at night? He should have walked away right then. Should have crushed out the cigarette and gone back inside, locked the door, forgotten this conversation ever happened. But there was something about the way she was looking at him, like she could see past the armor, past the reputation, straight down to whatever was left of the human being he used to be. And he hated that. Hated that she made him feel anything at all. You think you know me? He asked quietly, dangerously. I know enough. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I know you killed the man who raised you. I know you've got blood on your hands that'll never wash off. I know you're exactly the kind of person my father would throw in a cell and never think twice about. Then why are you still standing here? He was inches from her now, close enough to feel the heat coming off her skin. She didn't answer. Just stared up at him with those dark eyes that looked too tired for someone her age, and for a moment, the whole city seemed to hold its breath. The traffic noise faded. The wind died down. Time stretched out like taffy. And then she kissed him. Hard. Desperate. Like she was trying to prove a point or punish herself, or maybe both. Her hands grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him down to her level, and he froze for half a second before his brain caught up with what was happening. This was insane. This was suicide. This was the single dumbest thing either of them could possibly do. But he kissed her back anyway. Because apparently, self-preservation was overrated. His hand found the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair, and she made this sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sigh, that nearly destroyed what was left of his self-control. The kiss tasted like champagne and rebellion and everything he'd been taught to avoid. It was reckless and dangerous and absolutely, completely wrong. Which is exactly why it felt so damn right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she looked as shocked as he felt. Her lipstick was smudged, her carefully styled hair was a mess, and there was something wild in her eyes that definitely hadn't been there before. That was... She started. A mistake, he finished. Yeah. But she didn't move away. Neither did he. What neither of them noticed was the security camera mounted on the corner of the building, its red light blinking steadily in the darkness. Standard surveillance, the kind that recorded everything and stored it on a server downtown. The kind that Vince's own tech guys were supposed to monitor and control. The kind that should have been shut off during his meeting but wasn't because someone somewhere had made sure it stayed running. Someone saw that kiss. And 24 hours later, the entire foundation of Vince's empire started to crack. The next morning, 3 of his top lieutenants didn't show up for the daily briefing. Their phones went straight to voicemail. Their apartments were empty, doors left wide open like they'd vanished into thin air. $200,000 disappeared from one of his offshore accounts, the kind of money that doesn't just walk away without inside help. And then the rumors started spreading through the organization like wildfire. Whispers that the boss was compromised. That he'd been seen with Judge Hayes' daughter. That he was losing his edge, getting soft, making stupid decisions. Vince didn't panic. Panic was for amateurs. But he also wasn't stupid enough to ignore the signs. Someone was making a move, testing him, trying to see if the foundation was as solid as it appeared. And he had a pretty good idea who was behind it. Marcus Romano. His former right-hand man, the one guy who'd been with him since the Castellano days. The one guy ambitious enough to want the throne for himself. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem showed up 3 days after the kiss, when Alessandra walked into his office building in broad daylight, no disguise, no subtlety, just marched past security like she owned the place. His secretary tried to stop her, but she just smiled that perfect smile and said, "He'll want to see me." And damn it, she was right. She walked into his office, closed the door behind her, and dropped a manila envelope on his desk. "We need to talk." He didn't open the envelope. Just looked at her, trying to read the play, figure out what game she was running. "You've got about 30 seconds before my guys throw you out." That kiss. She sat down in the chair across from him, crossed her legs, cool as ice. Wasn't just a kiss. "Yeah, I figured that out when half my operation went sideways." "I know your secret, Vince." She leaned forward, elbows on his desk, and her voice dropped to something that made his blood run cold. "The real one. The one you've never told anybody. The one that'll bring this whole empire crashing down if it ever comes to light." He felt his jaw tighten, his hands clenching into fists under the desk. "You're bluffing." She reached across and opened the envelope for him. Inside were photographs. Old ones, grainy and yellow with age, but clear enough to make out what they showed. A warehouse in Long Beach. A man on his knees. A younger Vince standing over him with a gun. The night he killed Castellano. The night he took everything. But these weren't just any photos. These were the originals, the ones that were supposed to have been destroyed years ago, burned in a fire that conveniently wiped out all evidence of that night. Somehow, impossibly, she had them. How the hell did you? He couldn't even finish the sentence. Doesn't matter how I got them. She stood up, smoothing out her skirt. What matters is what happens next. Because this isn't about romance, Vince. This isn't about whether we can or can't be together. This is about survival. Yours and mine. He wanted to grab her, shake her, demand answers. But he just sat there, staring at those photographs, feeling the walls close in for the first time in a decade. What do you want? Same thing you do. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. To stop pretending. And then she was gone, leaving him alone with the evidence that could put him on death row and the sinking realization that he'd just fallen into a trap he never saw coming. He didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Just sat in his penthouse, smoking cigarette after cigarette, trying to figure out the angle, the play, the endgame. Because Alessandra Hayes wasn't just some random girl with daddy issues. She was smart. Calculated. Dangerous in ways he hadn't anticipated. And the worst part? He couldn't stop thinking about that kiss. About the way she'd looked at him like she understood something nobody else ever had. Like maybe, just maybe, they were both prisoners of the lives they'd been born into. But that didn't change the facts. She had proof of his first kill. She had leverage. And in his world, leverage meant power. Which meant she owned him now whether he liked it or not. The question was, what the hell was she planning to do with it? And that's where everything stops. Not the city. Not the empire. Not even Vince's heartbeat. What stopped was the illusion, the idea that he still controlled his own story. Because when someone holds the past in their hands, they own your future. So now I want to hear from you. If you were Vince, what do you do next? Do you burn every bridge and silence Alessandra before she exposes you, even though she's the only person who ever saw the human behind the monster? Or do you risk everything, trust her, and make her part of the empire, even if she's the only person capable of destroying it? Tell me in the comments. The secret wasn't about corruption. It wasn't about dirty money or crooked deals or the 1,000 other crimes Vince had committed over the years. Those were just business, the cost of doing what he did, and he'd made peace with all of it a long time ago. No, what Alessandra had uncovered was something far worse, something that cut straight to the foundation of everything he'd built. The truth about Castellano's death. The truth that would unravel his entire empire if it ever saw the light of day. See, everyone in the organization believed the same story, the official version that Vince had carefully constructed and maintained for 12 years. That Castellano had been killed by a rival crew from San Francisco, a revenge hit for a territory dispute that had gotten out of hand. That Vince had simply stepped up in the power vacuum, taken control because someone had to, because the organization needed leadership and he was the strongest candidate. It was clean. It was believable. And most importantly, it kept him in power. But the real story was uglier. Messier. The kind of truth that would turn every single one of his loyal soldiers against him in a heartbeat. Castellano hadn't been killed by rivals. He'd been killed because he was getting soft, making stupid decisions, jeopardizing everything they'd built. The old man had fallen in love with some cocktail waitress from Pasadena, started talking about retiring, maybe even going legitimate, opening up some restaurant on the coast and living out his golden years like a normal person. And that kind of weakness? That kind of sentimentality? It was a death sentence in their world. So Vince did what needed to be done. He put 2 bullets in the back of Castellano's head while the old man was on his knees, begging, actually begging for his life, promising he'd change, that he'd stay sharp, that he wouldn't abandon the family. But here's the part that would destroy Vince if it got out. Castellano wasn't just his boss. He was his father. Biological father. The man who'd gotten his mother pregnant during a one-night stand back when she was still young and beautiful, before the drugs ate her alive. Vince didn't find out until he was 16, didn't know that the man who'd taken him in off the streets was actually his old man trying to make amends for decades of absence. And Castellano never told anyone either, kept it secret because having a son made you vulnerable, gave your enemies a target. So when Vince killed him that night in the warehouse, he wasn't just committing murder. He was committing patricide. And not the accidental kind, not the heat of the moment kind. The cold, calculated, premeditated kind. He looked his own father in the eyes and pulled the trigger twice, then burned the building down to cover his tracks and stepped into the throne still warm from his father's blood. That's what Alessandra had. Proof of patricide. DNA evidence, photographs, witness statements from people who'd been paid off or scared into silence years ago. She had everything she needed to send him to death row, and California didn't mess around with that particular crime. They'd fast-track his execution, make an example out of him, and his entire empire would collapse overnight. When she showed up at his penthouse a week after dropping that envelope on his desk, he was ready for a confrontation. Ready for blackmail, extortion, whatever game she was playing. But what he wasn't ready for was the look on her face when she walked in. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days, and there was something in her eyes that looked almost like regret. "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" she said quietly, setting her purse down on his coffee table. "You thought you'd covered your tracks that well?" He didn't answer. Just stood there by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city sprawl out below them, all those people living their normal lives, completely unaware that two people 50 floors above them were about to change everything. "I've spent 3 years digging into cold cases," she continued, pacing slowly across his living room. 3 years trying to find something, anything that would prove my father isn't the saint everyone thinks he is. And you know what I kept finding? Your name. Over and over. Connected to murders, disappearances, money laundering schemes. But nothing stuck. Nothing I could actually prove. Until I found the warehouse fire. She pulled out her phone, pulled up a photo, showed it to him. It was a document, faded and water-damaged, but still legible. A DNA test from 1998. Castellano's name at the top. Vince's mother's name underneath. And a result that confirmed paternity with 99.9% certainty. "He kept it," Vince said, more to himself than to her. "That stupid bastard actually kept it. Hidden in a safe deposit box under a fake name. Took me 8 months to track it down." She put the phone away, looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much. "You killed your own father, Vince. Not because you had to. Not because he betrayed you or threatened you or did anything that actually justified it. You killed him because he wanted out. Because he chose love over power. And that terrified you. You wanted to deny it. Wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she didn't understand, that she had no idea what that world was like or what Castellano's weakness would have cost them. But the words stuck in his throat because she was right. She was absolutely, perfectly right. And that was the most dangerous thing about Alessandra Hayes. She saw through all the armor, all the justifications, straight down to the ugly truth he'd been running from for 12 years. "So what now?" he asked, his voice rough. "You're gonna turn me in? Destroy everything I've built? Make your daddy proud by putting another monster behind bars?" She laughed at that. Actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really don't get it, do you? I'm not trying to destroy you, Vince. I'm trying to save us both." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Emergency alerts from his security team, his lieutenants, his guys on the street. He grabbed it, scanned the messages, and felt his blood turn to ice. 3 black SUVs had just pulled up outside the building. No plates. No markings. But he knew exactly who they belonged to. Romano's crew. The guys who'd been quietly building a case against him, waiting for the right moment to make their move. And somehow they'd found out about Alessandra. About the kiss. About the evidence she had. They were coming to eliminate the threat before it could spread. "We need to leave," he said, already moving toward the hidden exit behind his bookshelf. "Right now." But Alessandra didn't move. Just stood there staring at her own phone, her face going pale. "Vince." "What?" "They're not just coming for you." She turned the phone around, showed him a text message from an unknown number. A photo of her father, Judge Richard Hayes, tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Blood running down his face. Eyes wide with fear. And a caption underneath, "You've got 30 minutes. Rooftop. Come alone or daddy dies screaming." Vince felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just about him anymore. Romano had escalated, taken a hostage, turned this into something way bigger than a simple power play. This was war. Full-scale, no-holds-barred war. And Alessandra was stuck right in the middle of it. "Why would they take my father?" she whispered, and he could hear the fear creeping into her voice now, the cracks forming in that tough exterior. "He's got nothing to do with this." But Vince knew better. He'd been in this game long enough to recognize a setup when he saw one. Romano wasn't after the judge. He was after the evidence. He knew Alessandra had proof of Vince's patricide, knew it was the one thing that could legitimately bring him down without triggering a war between the families. So he'd grabbed the judge to force Alessandra's hand, make her give up the evidence in exchange for her father's life. It's a trap, Vince said, already pulling a gun from the safe behind his bar. They want you to bring the evidence. Soon as you hand it over, they'll kill both of you and pin it on me. Clean sweep. Then what do we do? She was shaking now, trying to hold it together but losing the battle. I can't just let them kill him, Vince. I hate what he's become, hate what he did, but he's still my father. He stopped, looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment he understood something that scared him more than Romano, more than the evidence, more than anything that had happened in the past week. He cared about her. Actually cared. Not because she was useful or because she had leverage over him, but because somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, she'd become the one person who saw him as something other than a monster. And that made her the most dangerous person in his entire world. Because caring about someone meant having a weakness. And in his line of work, weaknesses got you killed. We're gonna get your father back, he said, checking the clip in his gun. But you need to trust me. And you need to be ready to do things you never thought you'd do. She swallowed hard, nodded. What's the plan? He pulled out his phone, sent 3 quick texts to the only guys he knew he could still trust. Then he grabbed a second gun, handed it to her. You know how to use one of these? Point and shoot, right? Close enough. He moved to the window, scanning the street below. The SUVs were still there, engines running, waiting. We've got maybe 15 minutes before they breach this building. We're gonna take the service elevator down to the garage, grab my car, and head to the rooftop they specified. But we're not walking in blind. I've got guys positioning themselves around the location right now. Soon as Romano shows his face, we take him out. And if something goes wrong? He looked at her and for the first time in 12 years, allowed himself to be honest. Then we die together. And at least it'll be on our terms. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fear and determination warring in her eyes. That kiss on the rooftop, it wasn't just defiance, was it? No, he admitted. It wasn't. Then let's make sure we survive this, she said. Because I'm not done figuring out what the hell this is between us. He almost smiled at that. Almost. But there wasn't time for sentiment. The clock was ticking, Romano was waiting, and somewhere across the city, Judge Richard Hayes was bleeding out in a chair, wondering if his daughter would be stupid enough to try to save him. Vince grabbed his jacket, checked his ammunition one more time and headed for the door. Alessandra followed, gun in hand, looking like some kind of avenging angel in designer clothes. They made it to the elevator, descended 40 floors in complete silence, both of them running through scenarios, calculating odds, preparing for the very real possibility that the next hour would be their last. When they reached the garage, his midnight black Dodge Challenger was waiting right where he'd left it, keys already in the ignition courtesy of one of his guys. They got in, he fired up the engine, and for just a second he let himself enjoy the rumble of all that horsepower beneath him. You ready for this? He asked. She chambered a round in her gun, clicked off the safety. Let's go save my father and destroy your enemies. Standard Tuesday night, right? Despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the absolute insanity of what they were about to do, he laughed. Really laughed. Because she was right. This was his life. This was what he'd chosen 12 years ago when he'd pulled that trigger in the warehouse. And now, somehow, impossibly, he had someone who understood that. Someone who saw the monster and stayed anyway. He peeled out of the garage, tires screaming against concrete, and pointed the car toward downtown. Toward the warehouse district. Toward whatever hell Romano had prepared for them. And as the city lights blurred past the windows, Vince realized something that should have terrified him but somehow didn't. He'd do anything to keep Alessandra alive. Even if it meant burning his entire empire to the ground. Even if it meant admitting that somewhere along the way, that kiss had stopped being about defiance and started being about something he'd sworn he'd never feel. Well, dangerous, reckless, absolutely insane love. The kind that gets people killed. The kind that starts wars. The kind that, once it takes root, can never be torn out without ripping everything else apart in the process. And he was totally, completely screwed. The warehouse was exactly what Vince expected. Abandoned, industrial, the kind of place where screams don't carry and bodies disappear without a trace. He'd been to 100 locations just like this over the years, had conducted his own business in places that smelled like rust and old blood and desperation. But walking in tonight felt different. Because tonight he wasn't the predator. Tonight, he was walking into someone else's trap, and the only thing keeping him from turning around was the woman beside him who'd somehow become more important than his own survival. They parked 2 blocks away, approached on foot, moving through the shadows like ghosts. Vince had his guys positioned on 3 surrounding rooftops, snipers with clear lines of sight, ready to light up anyone who made a wrong move. But he also knew Romano would have anticipated that. The man wasn't stupid. He'd been Vince's right hand for 8 years, knew every play in the book, every contingency plan. Which meant this whole thing was going to come down to who could outthink who in real time. "Stay behind me," Vince whispered as they reached the main entrance, a rusted metal door hanging half off its hinges. "And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments, no heroics. Just get the hell out and don't look back." Alessandra gripped her gun tighter. "Not a chance. We're in this together now." He wanted to argue, wanted to physically drag her back to the car and lock her inside where she'd be safe. But the look on her face told him that ship had sailed. She was committed. All in. And honestly, that made him respect her even more, even though it terrified him. They pushed through the door, entered a cavernous space lit by a few flickering work lights hanging from chains. And there, in the center of the warehouse floor, was exactly what the photo had promised. Judge Richard Hayes, tied to a metal chair, face bruised and bloody but still breathing, still conscious. His eyes went wide when he saw his daughter, and Vince could see him trying to shout something through the duct tape covering his mouth. But it was the figure standing behind the judge that made Vince's blood run cold. Not Romano. Romano was there, sure, standing off to the side with 4 of his guys, all armed, all ready for violence. But the man behind the judge, the one holding a gun casually against the back of Richard Hayes' skull, was someone Vince never expected to see again. Castellano. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like him. Same build, same face, same cold eyes that had haunted Vince's nightmares for 12 years. Surprised? The man smiled, and it was Castellano's smile, that predatory grin that used to make grown men piss themselves. "You should be. After all, you watched me die. Put 2 bullets in my head yourself, didn't you, son?" Vince's mind was racing, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to figure out the angle. This had to be a trick, some kind of psychological warfare Romano had cooked up. Maybe plastic surgery, maybe just someone who looked similar enough in the dim light. Castellano was dead. He'd made sure of that. He'd burned the warehouse to the ground, watched it collapse, made absolutely certain there was no way anyone could have survived. "He's not real," Vince said, forcing his voice to stay steady even though his hands were shaking. "Castellano's dead. This is just Romano messing with my head." "Is it though?" The Castellano look-alike tilted his head, and there was something in the gesture, something so familiar it made Vince's stomach drop. "You were always smart, Vincent. Smarter than I gave you credit for. But you made one critical mistake that night in Long Beach. You assumed I was alone. And then it clicked. The horrible, impossible truth. Castellano had a twin brother." Vince had heard rumors years ago, whispers about another Castellano who'd left the family business decades earlier, disappeared to Europe or South America or somewhere far away from California. But he'd never confirmed it, never thought it mattered because the brother was supposed to be dead too, killed in some gang war in the 90s. Except he wasn't dead. He was standing right there, holding a gun to Judge Hayes' head, looking at Vince with the same mixture of pride and disappointment that his brother used to wear like a second skin. "Uncle Marco," Vince breathed. "You're supposed to be dead?" "Yeah, well, so was my brother. Funny how that works out." Marco Castellano pressed the gun harder against the judge's skull, making the older man whimper through the tape. "See, when you killed Anthony, when you took everything he'd built and claimed it as your own, I was in Rome running operations overseas. Took me a while to hear about it, longer to piece together what really happened. But once I did, once I understood that my nephew, my own blood, had committed patricide." He shook his head slowly. "I knew I had to come back. Had to set things right." Romano stepped forward, and now Vince understood the whole picture. This wasn't just about a power grab. This was about revenge. Marco had come back to the States, made contact with Romano, offered him the empire in exchange for one thing: delivering Vince's head on a silver platter. "We've been planning this for 2 years, Romano said, and there was genuine satisfaction in his voice. 2 years of watching you, learning your patterns, finding your weaknesses. And then she showed up." He gestured at Alessandra with his gun. "The perfect catalyst. The one thing we knew you couldn't resist. A forbidden connection. A woman who could destroy you with evidence or save you with silence. We just had to wait for you to make the wrong choice." "That kiss on the rooftop," Alessandra said quietly, and Vince could hear the pieces falling into place in her mind too. "You made sure the cameras were running. You wanted someone to see. Give the girl a prize," Marco said. "We needed Vince off balance, making emotional decisions instead of strategic ones. And what better way than to dangle the judge's daughter in front of him? The one woman in all of California he absolutely shouldn't touch." Vince felt the rage building in his chest, The same cold fury that used to drive him when he was younger, when he'd first learned to kill. But he kept it in check, forced himself to think tactically. He had 3 snipers on the rooftops. Romano had 4 guys on the ground plus Marco. The odds weren't great, but they weren't impossible either. So what's the play here? Vince asked, buying time. You kill the judge, you kill us, and then what? You think the organization's just gonna accept Marco as the new boss? Most of these guys have never even heard of him. They'll fall in line, Romano said confidently. Once they understand that you were a fraud. That everything you built was based on a lie. Marco's the rightful heir. Anthony's blood. And with you gone, there's nobody left to dispute that. Except there is. Alessandra stepped forward and Vince wanted to grab her, pull her back, but she moved too fast. Because the evidence I have? The photographs, the DNA test, the witness statements? They don't just prove Vince killed Anthony Castellano. They prove something else. Something I only figured out 3 days ago when I ran the genealogy records. She pulled a folded document from inside her jacket, held it up where everyone could see. Anthony Castellano wasn't Vince's father. He was his grandfather. Vincent Moretti is Anthony's grandson, which means his real father was. She looked at Marco and Vince saw the color drain from the old man's face. Marco Castellano is Vince's biological father. Which means when Vince killed Anthony he wasn't committing patricide. He was avenging the grandfather who'd abandoned his son. The warehouse went dead silent. Even Romano looked shocked, his gun hand dropping slightly as he processed the information. Vince felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Everything he thought he knew, everything he'd built his identity around for 12 years, was suddenly turned inside out. That's impossible, Marco said, but his voice cracked. Anthony told me, he said Vincent was his son, his responsibility. He lied to you, Alessandra continued, her voice gaining strength. Because you'd gotten Vincent's mother pregnant and then abandoned her, left the country without a word. Anthony stepped in, raised the boy as his own grandson but told everyone he was the father to protect your reputation. To protect the family name. And when Vince found out the truth, when Anthony finally told him during that last meeting in Long Beach, that's when everything fell apart. Vince's memory was reeling, fragments of that night coming back with brutal clarity. The way Castellano had looked at him, the words he'd said right before the end, your father should have been here to see this. But Marco was always too much of a coward to face his mistakes. Vince had thought it was just rambling, the desperate words of a dying man. But it was a confession. A final admission of the truth that Anthony had carried for 30 years. You're my father, Vince said, and the words felt foreign in his mouth. You're the one who left. Who abandoned my mother to the drugs and the streets and the hell that killed her. Marco's hand was shaking now, the gun wavering against Judge Hayes' head. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was pregnant. By the time Anthony told me, by the time I tried to come back, she was already gone. Bullshit. Vince roared, and decades of rage poured out in that single word. You knew. You just didn't care. You were too busy running operations in Rome, too important to deal with the consequences of your actions. And then when Anthony tried to make it right, when he tried to give me a life, you stayed gone. You only came back now because you wanted revenge. Because your pride couldn't handle the fact that your son built something bigger than you ever could. The door behind them suddenly burst open, and Vince's security team flooded in, guns drawn, surrounding Romano's crew. His snipers had moved in from the rooftops, cutting off any escape. Marco spun, his gun swinging wildly, but he was trapped. Outnumbered. Outmaneuvered. Let the judge go, Vince said quietly. This is between us. Between father and son. The way it should have been 30 years ago. Marco hesitated, and in that moment, Vince saw something he never expected. Regret. Real, genuine regret in the eyes of a man who'd spent his entire life running from responsibility. I can't, Marco said. I can't let you win. Not after everything I've sacrificed. You already lost, Alessandra said. The second you chose revenge over redemption. The second you decided your pride was worth more than your son's life. And then everything happened at once. Romano made a move for his gun. Vince's guys opened fire. Marco squeezed the trigger. But Alessandra was faster, shoving the chair with Judge Hayes backward, knocking it out of the line of fire. The bullet went wide, sparked off the concrete floor. Vince lunged forward, tackled Marco to the ground, and the gun went skittering across the warehouse floor. When the chaos settled, when the gun smoke cleared and the bodies stopped falling, it was over. Romano was dead, shot 3 times by Vince's security team. Marco was on the ground, Vince's knee on his chest. a gun pressed against his temple. And Judge Hayes was alive, Alessandra cutting through the tape with shaking hands, pulling him into a desperate hug. Vince looked down at his father, at the man who'd given him life, and then walked away from it. And he realized something that should have come to him years ago. Revenge doesn't fix anything. Killing Marco wouldn't bring back his mother. Wouldn't erase the childhood he'd lost or the man he'd become. It would just be another body, another ghost to haunt his nightmares. "Get out," Vince said, climbing off Marco and holstering his gun. "Get out of California. Out of the country. I don't care where you go, but if I ever see you again, if you ever come back here, I won't hesitate. Blood or no blood." Marco scrambled to his feet, shocked that he was still alive, still breathing. "You're letting me go?" "I'm letting you live with what you've done," Vince corrected. "That's punishment enough." Marco stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly and stumbled toward the exit, looking older and more broken than when he'd walked in. And Vince felt something shift inside him, some weight he'd been carrying for 12 years finally lifting. But the relief was short-lived. Because when he turned around, when he saw Alessandra helping her father to his feet, he also saw the man standing in the doorway behind them. The man who'd entered so quietly that nobody had noticed until it was too late. Judge Richard Hayes may have been beaten and bloodied, but his mind was still sharp. And as he looked at Vince, really looked at him for the first time, recognition dawned in his eyes. "You," he said hoarsely. "You're Vincent Moretti. The one they call the Reaper." Vince said nothing. Just stood there waiting for the axe to fall. The judge turned to his daughter, and there was so much pain in his expression it was almost physical. "You knew. You knew who he was, and you." He couldn't even finish the sentence. "I knew," Alessandra admitted. "And I made my choice." The judge's hand moved inside his jacket, and for a second, Vince thought he was reaching for a weapon. But instead he pulled out a briefcase. The same briefcase Alessandra had seen 3 years ago. The one filled with dirty money. He set it on the ground between them and opened it slowly. Inside weren't stacks of cash. Inside were documents. Files. Evidence of every corrupt deal Judge Richard Hayes had made over the past 2 decades. Every bribe accepted, every case thrown, every criminal who'd walked free because the price was right. It was a complete record of his sins, meticulously organized as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "You want to know what your daughter was really hiding?" the judge said to Vince. "It wasn't your secret. It was mine. Every piece of evidence she collected on you? She was collecting it to protect me. To make sure that if you ever tried to expose what I'd done, she could destroy you first." Vince looked at Alessandra, saw the truth in her eyes. The way she'd played him. The way she'd played everyone. She wasn't trying to bring him down or save him. She was trying to create a stalemate. Mutually assured destruction. A guarantee that neither of them could hurt the other without destroying themselves in the process. "That kiss on the rooftop," Vince said slowly. "That wasn't defiance. That was a test. You wanted to see if I'd take the bait. If I'd let my guard down long enough for you to get what you needed." "It was," she admitted. "At first. But then." She trailed off, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. Vulnerable. Then it became something else. Something I didn't plan for. Something I couldn't control. The judge closed the briefcase, picked it up. "I'm turning myself in," he said, and both Vince and Alessandra stared at him in shock. "Tomorrow morning, I'm walking into the FBI office and confessing everything. Every crime, every dirty deal, every perversion of justice. And I'm going to recommend that they investigate you too, Mr. Moretti. Not because I think they'll find enough evidence to convict you, but because it's what I should have done years ago." "Dad, you can't," Alessandra said, grabbing his arm. "They'll destroy you. Everything you've built, your reputation, your legacy, was built on lies," he finished. "Just like his. The difference is I still have time to make it right. To face the consequences of my choices. To be the man I always claimed to be." He looked at Vince. "You should do the same. While you still can. While you still have someone worth changing for." And with that, Judge Richard Hayes walked out of the warehouse, taking his briefcase of sins with him, leaving Vince and Alessandra standing in the wreckage of everything they'd thought they knew. The silence stretched out between them, heavy with implications. Vince's guys had already started cleaning up the scene, dragging Romano's body out, erasing evidence, doing what they always did. In a few hours, it would be like nothing had happened here. Like the violence and revelations and impossible truths had never existed. "So," Vince finally said, "your father's going to confess. Which means in about 48 hours, every reporter in the state is going to be digging into everyone connected to him. Including you." "I know," Alessandra said quietly. And you're still standing here. With me. The one person you should be running from. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion and fear and something else in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. That kiss on the rooftop? You asked if it was just defiance. And I told you it was at first. But here's the truth, Vince. The real truth. By the time our lips touched, by the time I felt your hand on the back of my neck and tasted the rebellion and danger and everything I'd been taught to avoid. She took a shaky breath. It stopped being about manipulation. It stopped being about protection or leverage or any of the games we were playing. It became about two people who'd spent their entire lives pretending to be someone they're not. And for just a few seconds we got to be real. Vince wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe that something good could come from all this chaos. But he'd learned a long time ago that people like him don't get happy endings. They get prison cells or bullets or lonely deaths in expensive apartments surrounded by money that can't buy back the years. I can't change, he said. Not completely. This is who I am. What I am. And your father's right, I should probably turn myself in too. Face the music. But I won't. Because I'm a coward just like Marco. Just like every other man who's built his life on violence and lies. Then don't change, she said, and there was steel in her voice now. Don't become someone you're not. But maybe we figure out what comes next together. Maybe we use what we know about each other not as weapons but as protection. You keep my father's legacy from being completely destroyed, and I make sure nobody ever finds out about Marco or Anthony or the warehouse in Long Beach. Mutually assured survival instead of destruction. It was insane. Reckless. Exactly the kind of deal that would blow up in both their faces eventually. But it was also the only option that didn't end with one of them dead or in prison. You'd do that? He asked. Risk everything for someone like me? She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. I already am. The second I walked into your office with those photographs, I committed to this path. To you. For better or worse. Till death or prison do us part. He almost laughed at that. Almost. That's the worst wedding vow I've ever heard. Who said anything about marriage? But there was a glint in her eye that suggested she wasn't entirely joking. Vince looked around the warehouse one last time at the blood on the concrete, at his guys finishing their work, at the exit where his father had disappeared and might never return. Then he looked at Alessandra, at this impossible woman who'd walked into his life and turned everything upside down. And he made his choice. The same choice he'd been avoiding for 12 years. The choice to stop running from who he really was and start building toward who he might become. Come on, he said, offering her his hand. Let's get out of here before the cops show up. She took his hand and they walked out of the warehouse together, into the pre-dawn darkness of Los Angeles, where the city was just starting to wake up and millions of people were beginning another ordinary day. But for Vince and Alessandra, ordinary was over. The games had ended. The secrets were exposed. And what came next would either save them both or destroy them completely. 3 days later, Judge Richard Hayes held a press conference that shook California's legal system to its core. He confessed to 2 decades of corruption, accepted full responsibility, and resigned from the bench. The media went insane. The FBI opened investigations. And Alessandra watched it all from Vince's penthouse, sitting on his couch, drinking his expensive whiskey, and wondering how her life had gotten so completely, beautifully, terrifyingly complicated. Vince walked in from his office, where he'd been handling the fallout from Romano's death and Marco's disappearance. He looked tired but somehow lighter, like confessing the truth to someone, even just one person, had lifted a burden he'd been carrying too long. Your father's brave, he said, sitting down beside her. Stupid but brave. He learned from the best, she replied, and there was no sarcasm in it. Just acknowledgement. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights flicker and shift below them. And then Alessandra said the thing that had been on her mind since they'd walked out of that warehouse together. What happens when they come for you? Because they will. Eventually, someone's gonna connect the dots, figure out you're connected to my father's cases, start digging into your empire. What happens then? Vince considered the question carefully. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. Made it a choice instead of a fate. Then we run. Together. We take what we can carry and disappear. New names, new lives, new everything. And we start over somewhere nobody knows our faces or our sins. Mexico? She asked. Maybe. Or further south. Argentina, maybe. I hear Buenos Aires is beautiful this time of year. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. And for the first time in as long as either of them could remember, the future didn't look like a prison sentence or a death warrant. It looked like possibility. Dangerous, uncertain, absolutely insane possibility. You know what the really messed up part is? Alessandra said. What? I think I'm falling in love with you. And I'm not even sorry about it. Vince kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with gunpowder and whiskey. Yeah, me too. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow. Somewhere, Marco Castellano was boarding a plane to nowhere. Somewhere, Judge Richard Hayes was preparing for his trial. Somewhere, the FBI was building cases and connecting dots and moving closer to the truth. But up on the 52nd floor, in a penthouse that would be abandoned soon, two people who should never have met were writing a new story. Not a redemption arc. Not a fairy tale. Just a messy, complicated, brutally honest love story between two broken people who'd finally stopped pretending they weren't. And when the knock came on the door 3 weeks later, when the federal agents served their warrants and demanded answers, Vince and Alessandra were already gone. Vanished into the night like ghosts, leaving behind nothing but questions and empty bank accounts and a single note taped to the refrigerator. It read, "She was never the prey. She was the sentence." And he finally learned to accept his fate. The end. Or is it?